Hey, Jing here. Xiao's here too. Kind of here. I guess at least he's made it, and that is some huge progress. Anyways, let's start right away with a quick overview of the tutorial structure. First, I'll point at the key differences between your regular comics and the vertical scrolling format. In this section, I'll quickly rant over the major downside of this format before raising its strengths in terms of flow, transitions, and rhythm. Then I'll dive deeper into how to control rhythm in your webtoon. And eventually, I'll go through different types of transitions to make your comic stand out. Also note I work on Clip Studio Paint since it's perfectly designed to simplify the process of webtoon creation. I'll specifically mention the software's features that are super useful here. And without further ado, I'll start with this quite important downside that comes pretty obviously with the webtoon format, and that is the size ratio of the panels themselves. Indeed, the 9:16 size ratio of the phone screen is pretty restrictive, and it could almost feel claustrophobic at times. This is because you can't really do a lot of landscape format panels and wide panoramic views. I mean, you can, but the wider the panels, the shorter their vertical length, meaning you end up with tiny panels that won't offer a detailed view of the scene. Well, sometimes you just need a wide shot with only the silhouette of your characters. But if you want a horizontal panoramic view for an establishing shot, for example, then you'll have your readers flip their phone. This is a pretty big constraint when you start making webtoons for the first time, especially when you like to paint on a wide landscape format canvas like me. Indeed, before getting used to working on mostly portrait or square format panels for the webtoon, I would draw and paint 95% of my illustrations on a wide 3000 by 5000 pixels canvas. However, this is not necessarily a bad thing since you might learn a whole new type of composition. That constraint is more like a starting point for you to find creative ways to fit wide shots into the vertical panels. So we're now addressing the advantages of this vertical format, and the first one is all about flow, which will make or break your comic. Indeed, even if you have insane art and story, if your readers can't read it, they may just drop it. Fortunately, with the webtoon format, the flow is already here, since the order in which your readers see the panels is guaranteed. And on top of that, you save precious time for the coloring part. However, you can and should still work on the relationship between each successive panel. Indeed, if you want to make your webtoon truly shine, you should not let this guaranteed flow carry you entirely. On the contrary, this enhanced starting point should be taken advantage of to push the flow even further. And this is where transitions come into play. So your basic transition is a blank space between two panels. These enable your readers to breathe. You can totally embellish these spaces with any effects, such as these floating leaves. This is already a great way to bind panels together. But remember, your readers scroll down, meaning they don't follow an eye line like in traditional comics. Their eyes remain kinda static, and it's rather the next panel that comes to them. Meaning if you get rid of these blank spaces and panel borders, you get long vertical images which your readers scroll through. This creates a camera panning effect that, for instance, feels like establishing shots in films. And this you can achieve only with webtoons. So, if you don't exploit that aspect, you are missing on the best thing that the vertical format has to offer. That's why we'll discuss this further later on. And lastly, on top of creating cool transitions, you can have total control on rhythm by playing with the length of the blank spaces between panels. You can also achieve rhythm control through the actual content of the panels. Now these notions are the first ones we're addressing in detail. See, in animation, the more images you use to decompose a movement, the slower it feels. And on the contrary, when you go from two key poses with few to no images in between, the movement is quick. While the same applies to comics in general, with webtoons you can enhance this notion by playing with the distance between panels. For instance, in this rooftop parkour scene, I opted for short blank spaces or even panel overlaps to convey the feeling of swiftness. Here, I combine this with a low amount of movement decomposition. Indeed, the character goes from noticing something to chasing it in the span of 2 panels only. This enables me to emphasize on the character's fast reaction time. Clip Studio Paint lets you control the rhythm easily thanks to a super useful option. The latter enables you to preview your webtoon as the readers will see it on their phone. To do so, it's quite simple, just go to View on the top menu bar, then select On-Screen Area. Now you can make sure to see what fits in the 9:16 ratio screen. Obviously, this also lets you know what won't fit in the screen at the same time. Indeed, if you want to bring shock value with an unexpected panel, you can now make sure the said panel doesn't show up until the readers have finished to read the latest bubble. A bit like when the manga reader turns the page. You can also check the overall rhythm and flow of your webtoon. When you're on the project's page, go to View, then select Fit to Navigator. When it comes to the panels themselves, you can create their frames super quickly with the Clip Studio. All you need to do is go to Frame Border on the left tool menu, then select the rectangle frame for a basic panel. If you want a more personalized panel, you can use the polyline frame. Or even the frame border pen for total freedom. Once your frame is created, a folder appears in the layer menu. The drawing layer is in the middle, and everything you draw in here will remain within the frame. You can play with the line thickness, change the color and more. If you go to the operation tool, you can edit the frames freely. This applies to speech bubbles as well. Going back to the notion of rhythm, there is another powerful tool at your disposal. In the frame border menu, choose Cut Frame Border. When selecting Divide Frame Folder, you get to cut the frame you have created into two separated layers. If you select Divide Frame Border instead, it will cut the frame without creating a new layer, so that you can draw within both frames on the same layer. You can choose the thickness of the new space that will separate the panels. Thus, you obtain a group of similar panel shapes that serve the rhythm. For example, the panel group I went for here would be perfect to achieve a sense of simultaneous action. Indeed, I could have two characters, one in each panel, reacting to the same thing at the same time. Eventually, here is an example of how I use both the shape and the style of the borders to impact the rhythm. Still in this parkour scene, my panels follow this S shape, kind of like the character bounces from wall to wall. This way, on top of controlling the speed of my character's movement, I also manage to convey its direction. This is emphasized by the use of speed lines as frame borders. These also convey the feeling of swiftness while indicating the direction of the movement, which is reversed here as the character bounces backwards. Well, this is finally time to address the last part of this video on transitions. Since the notion of transitions is intimately bound to the ones of flow and rhythm, examples and bits of this theme have already been raised in this video, but let's discuss it a little further before finally concluding. To me, transitions are another powerful storytelling tool. They can be a huge factor in conveying the mood of a scene, a bit like a soundtrack. Indeed, through transitions, you can provide the reader with specific and explicit information, or more subtle ones. For instance, you can describe an environmental feature of the scene, like a windy weather, through some leaves floating around the panels. It could just be that the characters are talking while enjoying a peaceful early spring day, but it could also reflect their feeling of inner peace. Or maybe the characters are at a turning point in their life, which would be portrayed through these winds of change. These background visuals can bind the scene together to make its tone coherent throughout, but they can also be used to initiate or enhance a turn in the scene's tone. Indeed, they can appear anytime during the scene to support the panels without stealing the show. This can be as simple as the background color gradually changing according to the evolution of the emotions at play. Furthermore, still much like a soundtrack, the supporting role of the transitions can become as important as the main visuals in the panels, or even completely replace them. Here's an example of this. I brought this tone shift with the white background turning black, as dark thoughts grow in the character's mind, while also getting rid of the frame panels. I only kept the thought bubbles, and I therefore put the emphasis on the transition itself that became the primary and only visual. By removing the panels, which were like a window on the physical world of my story, I immersed the reader entirely in the realm of my character's emotions and psyche, now made visible. Now I also wanted to mention that transitions can be planned as early as the storyboard stage. Usually these will be the most meaningful transitions, since they are a direct execution of a specific idea you came up with prior. This was the case here. I had always this introductive series of transitions in mind, with deep meaning and implications for the whole story and its end. To be more specific, these shots refer to a succession of actual events in the story, each being the consequence of the preceding and the cause of the next. Once I had defined that idea as a starting point, I translated it into visuals. However, the opposite approach is also possible. Already existing visuals in the finished panels can inspire you for a transition you had not planned. It might be less deep than your planned transitions based on a specific and intentional idea, but every single thing you draw doesn't have to be super deep. Indeed, there is already meaning to be found in art that you enjoy creating, and that your readers enjoy looking at. And a good part of the most visually creative transitions are created this way. Here is an example of the transition I came up with through this approach. So I had finished rendering these two panels. Then, on the map 1, I added these southeastern inspired cloud patterns. Then this establishing shot trope of the viewer getting gradually closer to the setting by hovering through the clouds flashed before my eyes. This is when I decided I would bind these two panels using this cloud transition. Also, I didn't want this map to come from nowhere, and as I always loved this trope of an old wise person telling a story from ancient scrolls, I wanted to portray the moment when this narrator takes some old maps out of a dusty wooden chest. Well, I have talked way too much in this rather abstract part, so I am concluding it quickly with this other type of transition that I like to use. It's the characters trespassing the frame of their panels, or even the ones of other panels. As in this example, one of the uses of this is to convey the personality, the state of mind of a character, their beliefs and much more. Here the character has total control over his children, who admire him, while they always remain within their own panels, as they are taught to follow the rules of decency and traditions. Later in this scene, the son transgresses these rules and his portrait trespasses the corresponding panel, short before his father reminds him of his position. Afterward, the son is framed again, well within the borders of his panels. Well, I could talk about all this stuff for hours. I guess this will be for other videos in the future. I hope I was able to share something helpful to your approach on the notions of rhythm and transitions in webtoons. I am currently working on my second tutorial, much less abstract with more of a technical approach to stylized lighting of your characters' faces with striking shapes. You can find me on Instagram, where I update you guys on the webcomic project. On Insta and Patreon, there is also the monthly lottery. The two winners get a prize commission for almost free, since the monthly subscription to enter is €2. Anyways, I wish you a great time working on your art and I will see you on the next tutorial. Bye.